that led up to your coming to St. Louis to pastor Bethesda, and when were you first approached? What was involved in your decision to come here?
Yes, I was approached by the then elder E.L. Jackson, who was the district elder in the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, sometime during the summer of 1935. He was in Indianapolis to attend a wedding of a young lady who had attended his church in Terre Haute, Indiana, and while he was here at the wedding, he contacted me since I was doing evangelistic work and asked me if I would go down to St. Louis and hold a meeting, a revival for a group of saints that had started a mission at Good and North Market in St. Louis. And I went down and spent 10 days or 2 weeks, I've forgotten now, with them during June of that year, 1935. They were thinking that I was coming then to be their pastor because they were looking for a pastor. They didn't have one. But I told them no, I was just there to hold them that meeting, and I was leaving because I had no calling from God or no feeling that at that time I was ready to pastor. But I told them to pray, and if the Lord would say so, I would be glad to consider it. So that's the way I was introduced to Little Bethesda Mission.
Okay, you stated that it was Bethesda Mission when you first came.
Yes.
What happened that the church name was changed to Bethesda Temple?
When we moved from the little mission on the corner of Good North Market over to the building that we purchased at 2406 Belglade, then we called it Bethesda Temple because it was much larger and it looked more like a church than the little storefront that we had there on the corner of Good North Market.
Briefly describe Bethesda Temple when you first arrived there. Did it have a set program, or were there things that you had to
No, they had just opened sometime in the year of 1935. They were just there as a little group. I think they might have been having prayer meetings, but there were no organization, no Sunday school or anything else. There wasn't but about, I think I named 20 people that were there as members of the church, and there weren't any other auxiliaries other than just those 20 people.
Okay, so you're saying basically you had about 20 members?
About 20 members.
20 members, okay. Okay, how old were you when you first came to St. Louis?
I had just turned 22.
Well, how did you feel about the task that was set before you the day you arrived?
When I took over the pastorate,
yes,
you mean?
Sir.
Oh, I was very enthused and had a feeling that it was where God wanted me to be. I had that feeling from the very first that I was where God wanted me to be, and I was enthused about it even though it was a small work and I could see possibilities, great possibilities. And I never was discouraged, even though there was just that little group of people. I wasn't discouraged because I knew that all churches that have grown to any size has started from small beginnings. So I wasn't discouraged because it was small beginning. I thought that it was just a good place to start work. And then I was grateful because I had no previous pastoral experience, and I recognized the fact that I had to grow. So I was glad to start out with the small group so that we could more or less grow together, and we did.
Well, how did you feel about leaving your church home, church family here in Indianapolis? Was it difficult?
I didn't know. It wasn't difficult for me. It was difficult for Sister Golder. It wasn't difficult because I had done a bit of traveling away from home, and because of the depression and the lack of funds, usually I traveled by myself. But it wasn't any great test for me. It was quite a test for her. She was not only so far as the church was concerned, but so far as family was concerned. She was the baby child in the family, had always been close to her mother, and to talk about leaving and going away was not an easy decision for her to make.
Okay, how much work needs to be done on the storefront church that you are renting on Good and North America? You can describe it.
Oh, it was just when I went there, it was just a storefront that they had rented, and as I think I stated in the brief history, one of the brethren had secured some park benches to fill up for seats in there, and they just had cord drop lights and no platform, a borrowed piano, and that's about all that was in there. And we had to start from scratch to begin to make it look like a place of worship. We had to build a platform. I don't know now where we got the Bible stand. Eventually, the man that had loaned the piano wanted his piano back, so without a piano. And we had a chance to buy one later on for $5. And we bought the piano, and the brethren, we built a platform and got a rubber runner to go down the aisles. And then we had, so for seats, we just had odd chairs, as we could pick up odd chairs, straight chairs is all we had. And eventually, from that, we bought a tank, had a tank made for baptismal purposes. And one of the brethren that had gotten saved was a carpenter, and he enclosed it, and we built a little place in the corner of the room for changing apparel. And Christ Temple gave us some light fixtures, and we slowly but surely began to make it look like a little mission that no one would be ashamed to come into.
Okay. What were some of the elements involved in you moving to the location at Belgrade? Was it
we outgrew that little place. We stayed there until we outgrew it, and we really needed room so far as members are concerned. And then as members came and the Sunday school grew, we needed space. So we were looking for someplace that we could have for a larger place of worship. We needed it.
Were there any special difficulties or special miracles that God wrought in the move, that, anything special that you thought was significant, that getting that Steel Chest ice cream?
Yes, I consider a few things miraculous. First of all, we didn't have that much money. We had raised $500 for a down payment. At first, they were asking $20,000 for the building, but as we talked and talked, they eventually came down, and the building had deteriorated. And last time I went to talk to the owners, they said for me to draw them up contract as to what we could do. And I told them that I would like to purchase the building, and I think that I said $3,500 because it wasn't anything that we could use at the time, but it would have to be refurbished. And I told them that I would give them $500 down, and that for the first year I did not want to pay anything on the principal because we were going to have to refurbish the building. And he took my proposal and said he would look it over, and he did. And when he gave me an answer, he accepted everything with the exception of two changes, and he felt that it ought to have been at least at $3,700, and that our down payment should be $1,000 rather than $500. I'd have the $500, but I had been preaching for an elder, Harry Branding, who had a church down on South Broadway, I think. And he was a real estate agent, and I went to talk to him, and he said he would be glad to be agent for us, and not only that he would loan us the $500 to make the $1,000. I considered that miraculous because we had no other place to go. We had no credit as a church in that city, and for him to just, out of his acquaintance with me, he was able and did allow us to borrow $500 and made our $1,000 that we could purchase. And then secondly, I have always thought of what happened so far as we were concerned with reference to World War II. We had just closed the deal on the building when the war broke out in December of 1941. And we bought the building as it was. And there was a lot of pipe and vats and tanks. And we were able to salvage and to sell all the scrap iron and all the pipe. And in 30 days, we had $1,000 cash to begin our refurbishing of the building. That to me was again miraculous because again, we did not have any money. But God had made that way for us to get money to start our refurbishing. And thirdly, there was a brother in the church pastored by the late Bishop Lane. He was Elder Lane at the time. A brother George Miller, a white brother who was a carpenter. And he came out and worked for us, worked in that building for $15 a week. That almost seems impossible now. But $15 a week, and he could do quite a few things. He was a carpenter. He knew how to glaze windows, and he could do quite a few things. And he was a tremendous help in our refurbishing that building and got it on its way for us to have services in it. Those things I think were outstanding as I look back and see in those times, because we, as I said, we had no monies, and if God did not make some way for us, we couldn't have made it. We couldn't have made it. Also in those times, most of the materials were already taken over by the government, and you could not just go out and buy anything you wanted because the government had already requisitioned all the materials, and you had to get permits to buy. But God made ways for us to get the things that we needed. Many of the licensed men, electricians and whatnot, the government had employed them. We were able to get a licensed electrician who could not stay there and do all the work, but he told us what to do, and he would come by every evening and inspect it to see if we had done it as he said do it. And I learned to be a pretty good electrician as long as there was no electricity on. Yeah. I could run wire through the conduit and whatnot, but as long as there was no electric juice there, I was well able. But he would come by every evening and inspect it to see, and when it was finished, he was able to get an okay for the work we had done. So there were many things like that I thought only God made ways for us, because we did not have the abilities to do many of the things ourselves.
Okay. How tough was it during the Depression? Describe the economical situation and the general effect that it had on the congregation.
The money was scarce. Money was scarce. The few people that were there were very faithful financially, and from the beginning we had a tithe and free will offering system. But with that little group, that didn't mean too much. The highest paid individual in the little group was Deacon Elijah Patton, whose salary was $22.50 a week. And Brother Kenner, who was hauling coal, his salary was $15 a week. And the women who were domestics, the best that they made was $2 in car fare a day. I have seen many a week when the tithes and offering was maybe $2.75, $2.50, $5. And I can recall the first Sunday that it was $20. The deacon and I stood by the table and almost shouted at the fact that it was $20 on that Sunday. Because of the lack of finance, Sister Golder and I roomed when we first went there. And later on, we moved over with one of the sisters, Sister Selenia Davis, in her house at 3800 Cook Avenue. And they did that because they wanted to be sure that we not only had a place to stay, but also food to eat. So we stayed there until the congregation grew and we were able to move, and we got ourselves a little 2-room apartment. That was our first little venture out on our own as husband and wife in our own little place.
Okay, Bishop Golder, you also referred in your brief history that one sentence phrase, "This time in my life will always be remembered to me by as years of the right of the Most High." Could you elaborate on that statement?
Yes, I felt that there were so many little things that God did, outstanding so far as I was concerned, that I just felt that I was in the full favor of the Lord. He not only helped us so far as material things were concerned, but he did some things miraculously so far as the children of God were concerned that I have never had him to do since that time. I recall one Sunday morning I was impressed to pray for the sick. We didn't have that many people in there, but I was impressed. And there was one of the sisters who came up, Sister Emma Tate was her name, and she came up to be prayed for, and she had a garter on her neck. And just as I had got ready to lay my hands on her, the power of God struck her, and the garter disappeared. And she recognized, and the saints sitting in the audience saw an underslip of hers just fall down that she had over that space. Things of that nature. I was new to the people. They didn't know me and I didn't know them. But as Moses and Joshua, I think if you read the Old Testament record, it said that there was a day in their lives as leaders that God did something that magnified them in that position as the leaders of that people to quench any doubt that they were not the leaders. And God did that for me. He did that for me. One Sunday morning, I was preaching. I never saw this, but folk in the audience, I was preaching, and I noticed they were looking strangely at me in the pulpit. I didn't know just what they might be looking at. But after the service over, they said there was an angel that appeared in the pulpit there with me. I would have liked to have seen that myself, but they did. I didn't see it. They did. And it was what I felt that God had done to establish in their minds, to remove any doubts that I was the person that was to be there. There was no question about it, but I mean, if there had been any doubts in their mind, he had moved the doubts. So that's what I meant. And by other little things that he did, I think I made reference in the little history that we never had any large revivals. But I always felt that God had his hand in that, especially the first one. There was just one person that was saved in that first revival, a Sister Willa Mae McMichael. And she said that the Lord spoke to her and told her to come over to the mission. They live right across the street from us there at Good and North Market. And she said the Lord spoke to her and told her to come over to the mission. And that was our first revival, and had an evangelist from here in Indianapolis, a Mother Lucy Harris, and she came. And that night, Sister McMichael was baptized. She didn't receive the Holy Ghost that night, but the next day, Mother Harris went over to her house, and she received the Holy Ghost that next day, on the Monday. And I say that because through Sister McMichael, I can't tell you just exactly how many people were actually brought in to Bethesda through her, just through her family, her immediate family, her husband, her husband's mother, her husband's brother and his wife, her husband's sister, all came through her. And then friends of hers, there was a young lady, Idella Harrison, was brought in, and her sister and her husband, and I think you might have some of Sister Harrison's relatives in there now. Brother, I forgot, Brother Kirksey, young Brother Kirksey. Well, his father came and was saved. The Lord saved him. He came out to church on a Sunday morning to give me a whipping. And I think the thing to save me from getting the whipping was I got a chance to preach before he got a chance to see me. And he said after that sermon, that sermon caught him. It had not been, he came out there, and the thing that had upset him, his wife had gotten saved, and she had begun to tithe, and he gave her the money, his paycheck, and she paid the bills, and she would just make out a little slip of what she paid out, and when she handed him his slip, she had up the top of it tithe, and he asked her, what is that? She said, that's a tenth of your salary that I put in church. He said, a tenth of my salary? I said, yes, I put that in our church every Sunday. You mean to tell me that you're giving a tenth of what I make? He said, yes, I'm giving to church. She said, no, you're giving to the preacher. So I'm going out there and get that preacher. I'm going out there and get that preacher, taking my money. And he came to church with that intention. But he said, I got a chance to preach before he was able to get down where I was. And the sermon I preached that Sunday morning caught him. He told me what the subject was, and I've never forgotten. I preached that Sunday morning from 2 Samuel, I think the 3rd chapter and the 31st verse, where David lamented over the death of Abner and said, died Abner as a fool dieth. And he said, I talked about men dying like fools. And he never got away from it. He came and got baptized, and eventually became a very fine brother in the church, was one of the persons that helped us refurbish the building and make it usable. He was a fine painter, fine. Never saw a man paint as cleanly as he did. He could paint without putting down any kind of drop cloth. All he had was what they call a tack rag that just sometimes a spot here and there, but that was all, just as clean as he could be. Very fine brother. And through him, Brother Lewis McMullen and his family. So all out of that one sister, Sister McMichael, that came in.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Bishop Golder, how much of a role did your late wife play, Sister Elizabeth Golder?
She worked right beside me, all the way, right beside. I have said that we grew up together in the work. It was all new to her, it was all new to me. But she fit right in, and we went along together, even, as I said in the brief history, in those lean years, there was no complaint, no murmuring. She seemed to recognize the fact that it was a new beginning, and the people were not, it was not a matter of being neglected. They were doing the very, very best they could do. And she recognized that, and there was never a complaint, never a complaint. She worked right alongside. As I said, we cleaned the church. I usually was the baptizer, and she was one of the altar workers, working around the altar, because there were very few of the people that was in that little group that had ever done altar work. There was, however, and I must mention here, one of the good brothers, Brother Joseph Farmer, that had been a good, and he was a good altar worker. He would, if necessary, he'd stay at the mission all night long, and anybody wouldn't tarry that long. He was a good altar worker, but she was an altar worker. She Sunday school teacher. I think she was the first Sunday school superintendent that we had there at the church.
Okay. Bishop, you talked about the growth of the church when you moved from Goodenough Market to Belgrade. You talked about the growth. What do you think contributed to the growth of the church?
Well, there might be a number of things. In those early days, I did a lot of traveling, evangelizing. Did a lot of traveling. But after we moved over there and the responsibility, I cut back on the traveling a bit and stayed home more. Secondly, I think when we began to look as if we were going to be an established institution, that had its effects on people. Sometimes people have the feeling that as long as it's a storefront, it's more or less a mobile, you don't know whether to cast your lot there or not. It might not last too long or what. But once we got in that building, I think that also added to the feeling that we were going to be a permanent institution in the city. And as the number began to increase, many of the families began to bring their relatives, their friends, and they began to come and become members of Bethesda.
Well, what would you how would you describe the congregation?
Oh, the congregation was a very, so far as I'm concerned, I can never say anything negative. They were God-loving people. They were eager to learn. They were eager to serve. It was a happy, a joyous experience for me. I can always look back at the 12 3/4 years that I spent there as 12 3/4 years of some of the finest days of my pastoral life. They were days of struggle at the first, days of privation, but it was not because of that people. It was just because of the times. But it wasn't. The people did everything within their power to make things as they ought to be. They were a working people. They were a liberal people. They were a prayerful people. It was a joyous experience. I didn't want to leave so far as me wanting to leave. I left because I felt again that God wanted me back in Indianapolis. That's my only reason for leaving.
Okay. How would you describe St. Louis at that time?
St. Louis was a growing city, and I might say that St. Louis was a city moving faster so far as integration was concerned than Indianapolis. When I went to St. Louis, there was segregation there to a great degree. There were many places downtown in 1935 that blacks could not eat. One of the things that affected me most was the educational opportunities in St. Louis. I wanted to go to the university while I was there, but neither Washington nor St. Louis University was open to blacks. That hurt me more than anything else that was there. I wanted to continue my education, but I did it by correspondence. But I always wanted to go and receive the academic training, but the doors weren't open. The year I left St. Louis, coming back to Indianapolis, was the year that they opened St. Louis University and Washington University to blacks, but I was on my way out. But let me say this, I also feel that was a work of God. For when I came back to Indianapolis, I found an opportunity here for the training that I wanted to receive in a greater degree of, what shall I say, a lack of finance necessary to go through than I would have had to pay in St. Louis. So I consider that too to be a move of God.
You also talked about, I read your book about the history of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, and you stated at one point that you were involved in the organization of the Midwestern District Council that exists now.
Yes. At that time, when I went to St. Louis, there wasn't any Pentecostal Assemblies of the World activity in St. Louis. The late Elder Lane had belonged to the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, but there had been an attempted merger of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World and the Apostolic Churches of Jesus Christ in St. Louis in September of 1931. That merger lasted until 1937, when it just sort of disintegrated. But PW-wise, there was no work there. And when I came to St. Louis, I was the only person associated with the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World in St. Louis. And it was after I'd gotten there, and we did organize a Pentecostal Ministerial Alliance, which embraced Pentecostal ministers of any organization, just more or less for discussion and fellowship, to bring about a better unity among the Pentecostals in St. Louis. That was not PAFW, that was just Pentecostal. And there were acquaintances made through that alliance. And I think one of the high points out of that alliance was that I met and became acquainted with the now Bishop P.L. Scott. He and I became bosom friends out of that. And it was out of that friendship that he said to me, he was at that time the presiding bishop of a little organization of his own. I don't think he had over 8 or 9 churches, and they were small. But he said to me once that he was tired of being out there by himself attempting to do the work that he was trying to do. And I recommended that he would come to one of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World's annual conventions and just look in and see what he thought about it. And if he did, I'm sure they'd be glad to have him. And he did just that. And of course, after seeing that, he cast his lot with the organization, and we began to work together to form the Midwestern District Council, and we did. And we got Elder Lane at that point to work with us, and he worked with us, and we went across the river. There was, at that time, Elder E.C. Seals had about the only church in East St. Louis that was of any size so far as PFW was concerned. And they allowed us to take in East St. Louis. And there was a church in Mount Vernon, Illinois. They allowed us to have that. And we contacted the people on the other side of Missouri in Kansas City, and they came. And that was the beginnings of the Midwestern District Council. And it turned out to be a very fine working group, and has grown into what it is now.
Okay, what sort of group, or how did the Pentecostal Ministerial Alliance come about? What was its intent?
Well, the intent was two. Unity first. And there were different beliefs, different ideas. And we thought that if we could come together and discuss those ideas, there might be that we'd be able to see a little differently and break them down and get closer together. And that those were the two reasons. It wasn't a monetary thing. We were not trying to build an organization of our own. It was just a matter of attempting to come together and discuss those things that were differences. And there were some differences. There were some doctrinal differences. And we met on Monday night, and we would discuss those doctrinal differences, see that if we couldn't abolish them and come closer together as Pentecostals. That was the purpose.
Okay. Okay, Bishop Golder, do you now see, I realize the church has come a long ways, do you see any changes? I know that there are changes, but major changes from the inception, from when you first came to Bethesda to the period you are now, I guess the history of your ministry, do you see any major changes in our, not so much maybe our doctrine as much as tradition or our traditional practices?
Yes, I see. And of course, time normally brings about change. There are some things that one expects to change. Nothing remains the same here. But there are some things that never change. And where God is concerned, and many of the basic doctrines, basic ideas, basic concepts, biblical concepts, they never change. One of the things that disturbs me most today is the fact that there is a lack of the depth of spirituality that people had, shall I say, 50 years ago. There's a lack of depth. I've often made reference to that little mission that we had. I could call a prayer meeting, and of course there wasn't too much work, of course, as it is now, but I could call a prayer meeting at 12 o'clock noon, and I could count the head of every member of that church on their knees at 12 o'clock noon. I could call a prayer meeting at night. And the brethren, well, I might say that even those brethren were working. At noon, they'd get off and be then at noon prayer meeting and go back to work. There was a sincerity. We didn't have all of the comforts that we have now. No air-conditioned church. And when we went into that place over on Belglade, it was upstairs. And St. Louis was one of the hottest places I'd ever been in my life. I spent 30 days in a whole month one year with a temperature in the summertime better than 100 degrees every day. And it was hot, and about the only breeze you'd get would just raise the windows, and if it didn't come in, there was no breeze. But those people were faithful to church. They didn't have to be anything special. They were faithful to church. We could have all-night prayer meeting. In that little mission we had it. I remember one winter we had an all-night prayer meeting. Went in to pray, and when we came out, there was 12 inches of snow on the ground. And we trudged through that snow, getting home, walking home, no automobiles, walking home. There seemed to be a depth of spirituality, a depth of sincerity, that you didn't have to beg folk to do this and that and the other. It just seemed to be automatic, something automatic in their spirits. You didn't have to threaten them that this and that and so will happen if you don't do this and so and so. No. There seemed to be something in them that prompted them to want to be. And that's something that I've seen in this church. And I've built this church too, from about 30 members up to better, somewhere between 800 and 900. But that spirit generally isn't there. And I attribute that more to the fact that in this time we have so many things that those people didn't have. Church played an important part in their lives. There weren't magazines, there weren't newspapers, there wasn't television. I bought my wife a small radio while I was in St. Louis. A little 5-tube radio was the first radio that we ever owned. And the stations, I can almost tell you now, and that's been 50 years ago, the few stations that were in St. Louis, and the few stations that you could pick up on that radio at that time. Automobiles, everybody in that little mission walked to church. There was very few automobiles. And the social life, as well as the spiritual life of those members, was all wrapped up in their church association and affiliation. Everybody was glad to see one another. Glad to see. I can remember the time that when a person received the Holy Ghost and became a new member, why, you would have thought an angel came. Everybody wanted to see the new brother or the new sister. And not only want to see them, they wanted to give them a holy kiss just as soon as they got there. But all of that, I guess as the family gets larger, and the times, that sort of dies out. It's changes in the times. And I think, as I said, that this thing of depth and sincerity bothers me most as to change. Other changes, and of course, when it comes down to sincerity, the lack of sincerity that allows for a lot of other things to creep in that wouldn't be there if there was that. I was just writing an article for my church bulletin next week, and I was talking about holiness. Now, if I'm talking too much, just stop me.
Sounds good.
I was talking about holiness. Two phases of holiness: the negative aspect and the positive aspect of holiness. One of them deals, the negative aspect deals with being separated from. And that's what we usually put the emphasis on. But so far as I'm concerned, the most powerful and the more important emphasis is the positive aspect, which is dedication to, a sense of dedication to God. That's the most powerful aspect in one's life, that sense of dedication. And that seems to be the thing that's lacking in these times. Children of God don't strive for excellence. They are satisfied to just be. But the sense of excellency is so sparse. It's not there. They don't think in terms of being the best. Just being. that to me is one of the greatest changes that I can see.
That's good. Okay. I wanted you to try, I guess, to just, you stated in here that your leaving was because you felt God beckoned you back to Indianapolis, and one of the things that you talked about, it was an honor to go back to your home church where you came from.
Yes.
It being the mother church of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world. What were some of the elements that, led up to them wanting to, we could get Bishop Golder back, after you were established in St. Louis? To just talk about some of those elements, and then you stated that parting was such sweet sorrow, words of Shakespeare. Kind of describe some of those things.
Had it not been that I felt that it was a move of God, I'd have never left St. Louis. Because, as I said, it is, and has been one of the most blessed experiences of my life. I had no reason to want to leave. God was blessing, things were moving on, and as I said, very fine people. The blessings of God had begun to come even in a physical way, a natural way, financial way. And it seemed that the light had just begun to shine in a bright sense, in every respect. And I was down on my knees praying for Indianapolis because the pastor had died. I had no desire to come back. I mean, I was down praying, and something spoke and let me know that I didn't tell the wife for some days, and then I told her, and we didn't tell anybody else. Just left it there because I was not eager to come back. I had no reason to want to come because I felt that God was using me in the sense that He was building a work, and that's what I went there for Him to do, to build one. I didn't have any desire to go to a work already built. I went there to build one, and I was satisfied with what He was doing. And when I felt after He let me know that He wanted me to come back, it was a grievous thing to me because I hated to have to tell those people that I was leaving. I hated that. I hated to tell them because I loved them. I loved them, and I know they loved me, and I loved them. And I didn't want to go. I was being obedient to God to go. Nobody had made any overtures to me. Nobody had talked to me about coming home. I just knew what He'd said. I just knew what He said. Nobody had said a word. But I don't know how much later, I got a call from the secretary of the board of Christ Temple asking me would I come home and talk with them. They wanted to talk to me, and I knew what they wanted to talk about. Before he even said, I knew what they wanted to talk about. So I told him yes, I'd come. And I caught a train and came and sat down and talked to them. And they told me that they had considered me, and they wanted to know if I would think in terms of coming back home and pastoring the church. And as I said, it was an honor. It was an honor for more reasons than one. Not because I considered Christ Temple the mother church. That wasn't the honor. The honor was that church had the founder of the church was one of the finest Pentecostal ministers that this era has known, the late Bishop G.T. Haywood. And he was head and shoulders above any man in his time. He had been the founder of the church, the first presiding bishop of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world, a scholarly man, a holy man, and for me even to be considered, and there had only been one man between him and me, it was humbling. Even though it was an honor, it was most humbling. And I told him, well, I tell you what you do. I had told him to do just exactly what I told Bethesda to do. You pray. And if it is God's will, I'll have to move as he would have me move. And of course it was his will. And I told Bethesda it was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do. One of the hardest, because they were tearful, they were heartbroken, and they asked me a question that I couldn't answer. That was, what are we going to do? I couldn't answer that. Because at that time I didn't know of anybody that I could even recommend. I didn't know of anybody that I could recommend. And I didn't recommend anybody. I kept my hand over them, and every 10 days or 2 weeks I was back down there and stayed with them over the weekend or maybe 4 or 5 days, because the wife and daughter hadn't moved. They were still there. I was here from February of 1948 till June of 1948 before they came here. Because at that point I couldn't find any place. Couldn't find any place to stay before we thought about moving. So they were there. So I'd go back and forth down there. Drove most of the time back and forth down there. But it was heartrending to leave. It was heartrending, and then have to go back and forth, and know how they felt. That was heartrending. But as I put in the history, that I saw to it that they had a ministry, not just anybody that would come along, but a good ministry that would be soul feeding and would teach them the truth. One of the ministers that I had to visit in that interim, District Elder Gus Hogan, said to me after he went there and preached for them, that even though I wasn't there, it was one of the best organized churches that he had ever evangelized in, even though I was absent. A very, very, very obedient church. And I prayed, they prayed. There were 1 or 2 brethren that wanted me to just turn the church over to them, but I didn't feel led to do it. And I just happened to remember Elder Johnson at the time evangelizing. He was evangelizing out of Michigan. And I asked him if he would go down and hold a meeting. And I did for him as Elder Jackson did for me. I told him, I said, go down and hold a meeting. If you don't have any feeling that you want to stay there, you don't have to. I said, but if you pray and the Lord leads you, the church is yours. And he went down and held a meeting, and I guess he prayed, and he said he felt led of the Lord to stay. And I just turned the church over to him, lock, stock, and barrel, without any strings attached. Just turned over to him. And as I said in the history, it has turned out to be the right move. He's been there, and Bethesda is there, and not only on the move, but so far as I'm concerned, on a meteoric move, and which I consider again the blessing of God.
Why Bishop Johnson?
Well, Sister, I hadn't heard Bishop Johnson preach that many times, but I had met him. I'd preached at his home church in Flint for Bishop Bowden, who was there, just Elder Bowden at that time. He and I had been friends in Indianapolis here before he married. Elder Bowden came from Los Angeles to Indianapolis to sit under the teaching and ministry of Bishop Haywood, and he and I had become bosom friends here while he was here. And then he married Sister Viola Horner here, and then they went on from here to Morgan Park for a short stay, and then on to Flint. And I was up there preaching, and I met Elder Johnson then, met his family. And across the years, we'd had just meetings here and there. but I liked the fact of his studiousness, his love of the Word. I liked the fact that he seemed to want to be something for God. There seemed to be a sense of holiness and righteousness. There wasn't a lot of frivolity. I mean, he wasn't a crepe hanger, and yet on the other side, he wasn't a playboy either. And all of those things just seemed to stick out in my mind. And since it was a comparatively young church, I felt that being of his age, and he had just, when he came down to St. Louis, I think either maybe to hold the meeting, he stopped through here in Indianapolis. His first child was just born. Mm-hmm. He had just had one child when he went down, I think maybe to hold a meeting. And I felt that he was at such an age that he could grow with that young church, because it wasn't all that old. And he could grow with it. There were a lot of things, and there weren't so many people. You know, many times when a man goes into a church and has been established a long time, and they have been accustomed to doing things a certain way, the next man that follows has a hard time, because those old timers in that church don't want to change and do something like the new pastor is accustomed to doing it. So I felt that the church was at a stage, and his going in, he could have the opportunity without too much of a problem of molding it and shaping it the way he wanted it to go. Mm-hmm. And all of those things figured in my mind when I thought of him. Mm-hmm. And as I said, it's worked out to the good of Bethesda Temple.
Mm-hmm. Right. Bishop, go to one last question. What message would you have to the church today?
That is not an easy question to answer, because I think at this time the church in general could stand messages, not just one, could stand more than one message. But I think if there's any one area that I feel like messages should be preached in, is in the area that I just discussed with you, that area of a depth of sincerity, a depth of the sense of holiness and righteousness, a depth of being what God intended his church to be. It would be in that area.
All right. Okay. Karen?
Perfect.
Oh, we had 2 minutes left on the tape.
Okay.
Okay. That was excellent, Bishop.
I'm glad.